You're listening to Talking Law, the podcast where business owners just like you discover how to avoid legal landmines and build value using smart legal tips.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here and welcome back to Talking Law, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here and welcome back to Talking Law, a podcast brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, today we have on the show Ben Fewtrell, who is the co-founder and managing partner at Max My Profit. He's a business advisor and keynote speaker and also has his own podcast called Business Brain Food, where he interviews leading experts on business building tips. Now, in this episode today, we are moving a bit broader than our usual discussion of legal topics, and instead we're looking at some of those legal issues in the context of growing and scaling a business. Ben and I in this episode talk about the most common challenges that business owners grapple with when they're scaling up their business. We talk about the risks facing directors and we highlight some action steps that business owners can adopt in order to take their business to the next level. So here we go. Hi Ben, thank you so much for joining us. Could you start off perhaps by giving us a bit of your background and how you ended up at Max My Profit?
Sure. It's I'll try and give you the short story because
Sure.
I turned 45 next week, so I've been on this planet for a little while now. But I actually didn't do very well at school. I know a lot of people hear this from people that run businesses, and I guess I worked out pretty early that the one thing I didn't want to do. I remember going through one year where I had just as many jobs as there were months in a year, And I always say to people, what do you think I learned out of that? And they go, well, that you couldn't work for someone else. And that's 100% correct, as I quickly worked out that I'm not a good employee. And I ended up starting a transport company of all things. And it was only because when the one job that I did love was being a independent contractor, which is the terminology they use for a courier driver, basically. And I had my own van. I was driving around Sydney. But I loved the fact that I was autonomous. I could choose the hours I was going to work. I didn't have to really answer to anybody. If I wanted the day off, I could take the day off. And so that was sort of what I did when I was, I was 18. And that made me realize that I love that sort of thing. But it got me into the transport industry. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have ended up being in the transport industry. But one of the things that happens when you're really good at knowing your way around Sydney is companies then look for radio operators to be able to operate this fleet. Because back then, computers and GPS wasn't a very big thing. Mm. So, I ended up getting a job as a radio operator, but then led to me in a management position and then going one day having what I call an e-seizure, which is that entrepreneurial seizure where I go, you know what, I'm making all this money for someone else. I could be doing this for myself. Mm. And so I started a transport company and got about 4 years into that and was working ridiculous hours. I mean, ridiculous hours. Like I would start at 5 in the morning and I'd finish at 9 at night. And that was my normal day, 5 days a week. I had a young family. I had a wife who was really getting fed up with the hours I had to work. I wasn't making any money out of my business. And to be honest with you, I mean, men's depression or depression in a whole wasn't really well educated back then, but there was no doubt I was suffering from depression. I was not feeling good. I was not eating well. I was lethargic. I didn't want to be at work. I didn't want to do anything. I wasn't motivated. And it got to a point where I had to make a decision. And, all these things happen at critical points in your life. And the decision I made was that I had to get out of that business. And it was a tough one because I was actually in business with my father-in-law. He funded the business when we started it. And but I just woke up one morning and said that I've had enough. And I went in and said to him, mate, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to leave. And he said, how long we got? And I said, well, I'm going to go today. I just can't do this anymore. And I'd had all sorts of weird thoughts going through my head, which, people with depression would probably understand. And I think from that point forward, I actually asked myself the question, Joanna, which is funny. I'd met a business coach about a month, about 6 months before that point in my life at a networking event. And those networking events where you go, they're breakfast events, and you got to do your, I think they call it your elevator speech. You got 60 seconds. Yeah. And he stood up and he said, my name's Andrew. He said, I help business owners make more money and work less hours. And then he sat down and I thought, but that's exactly what I need. I need this guy. And I remember telling my father-in-law about it, and he wasn't really open to these new things, so it never happened. But when I made that decision to get out of the transport game, I thought, I wonder if I could do what that guy does. I wonder how many business owners are in the same boat I was, where I was under the illusion that by working hard, I was actually going to be successful.
Yeah.
And I thought, It's saying the harder you work, the luckier I get. But I don't think that's true, right? So I think it's the smarter you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
And so I was at that point where I wonder how many. There must be so many other business owners that are struggling, and they're working hard under this false impression that working really hard, grinding is what's going to make them successful. And really, all it was doing was costing my personal life, my friendships, my own health, my own mental well-being. And so I went and seeked this guy and said, "How do you do what you do? How do I do what you do?" And he explained to me it was part of a franchise group, and that was business coaching. So it wasn't long. It was only a few months. And I bought a franchise, and then I became a really successful business coach in the sense that I was good at getting clients, good at helping clients grow their businesses through sales and marketing. I then built a team, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided that I'd outgrown the franchise. I needed to do my own thing. And I moved on from that, developed new systems, and Max My Profit was born. And Max My Profit is a business that has I feel we've turned business coaching on its head, because we're not a business coaching company. What we are is we're a business growth company, and we support business owners to grow their business. We do have coaches for accountability if people want them, but they don't need to access them. The other thing that I learned after all these years of working with hundreds of businesses was that every business has 5 different stages of business growth they have to go through. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, what you do, there are commonalities. And they're to do with things like marketing and team and systems and financials, et cetera. So we've developed this. When I say we, it's me and my business partner have developed a 5-stage, what we call a business acceleration blueprint. And it's a step-by-step process, probably as close as you can get to growing a business through an instruction manual as you're ever going to find for growing a business. And so Max My Profit was born, and it's been going strength to strength. We're finding that people really love the fact that they can access a community, all the tools, the resources, and helps them grow their business.
Wow, that's great. That's a really good background, Ben. And so obviously you've been in quite a few businesses yourself, and obviously worked with, it sounds like, many businesses over time. What business, I guess, are there any commonalities in some of the issues that you've seen businesses facing and grappling with over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few key issues that businesses face, or business owners face, because businesses are just an entity, right? So it's usually the business owner. And to put it in perspective, Joanna, most business owners start a business because they're good at what they do or they love what they do. And they don't have the training to manage the things that they're going to have to manage in their business. And so, I always say to people, being good at what you do is not enough. And so they are challenged with things. They're challenged with things like, when their business grows, they have to hire somebody to help them. That's a decision they quite often make. And they're challenged with hiring. They're challenged with managing people. Yeah. The other thing is you have to go from a mindset of earning money to making money. A business is different, right? You're going to get paid for your job within the business, but your business should also make money. It should make profit. That's how businesses survive. And so you've got to have a different mindset. I find people are really challenged with thinking about a business as a separate entity to themselves, and especially very small businesses,
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
They see every dollar as their own dollar, and it's not. It's the business's money, and they should be getting a wage, but they don't pay themselves that much.
Yeah. And often I find, in that sense, one of the issues can also come with the way a business is structured. So, for example, I see that issue as a stronger issue for sole traders, for example, who really in their head can't really separate the emotion of the business versus themselves. And then, adopting structures. And, almost none of our clients are sole traders, because by the time you get to the point of realising that you need a lot of legal assistance, you've already sort of realised you need an entity to protect you, like a company or a trust structure. But it's just one example, I guess, of how the psychology between how you look at a business and then operate it, it really needs to be this separation to you.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference in being self-employed and owning a business. And there's nothing wrong with either. I always say to people, don't be ashamed to just be self-employed. If you're happy to, I guess, take all the risks that there are with that, then that's okay, because there is also risks with having a business, and a lot of people out there saying you should be building a business, you should be doing this, but a lot of people aren't suited to that. The one thing I've learned, Joanna, some people just aren't good business owners, right? That's just the reality. Some people just aren't cut out for it. They're better off having a job, and sometimes they're better off being self-employed. They run their own race, But if they take a holiday, they get sick, of course, their income stops. So they've got to protect themselves for that.
And look, it's a really interesting point that you're talking about here. And, usually in this podcast, I talk more about specific legal issues. And I really like this as an opportunity for us to get a bit deeper into some of these issues, because I think your example of running this business and running yourself into the ground through a business and yet not making any money is a phase that many business owners have had in their life. And sometimes that phase will never pass in the business that they're in, and I think this is a really hard reality to get to, that crunch point of working out what are the signs that I should be leaving a business. And what do you think those signs are? I mean, I've got an example of some signs in my head, which I'll throw in there, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you ever see people, or did you ever in your coaching time see businesses that you just said, look, you've just got to cut it, or this is the point where, you've just got to walk away and maybe the future is in something else or in employment for you?
Definitely. And I mean, I myself have suffered from that, because I think as entrepreneurs, we're extremely optimistic.
Yeah.
So we get an idea and we think it's the greatest idea on the planet. And so we will push the envelope to try and make it work. Part of it's probably pride, but part of it is just the passion for what we do is so strong that we just can't imagine that it wouldn't exist. And so we push harder than we should. And so I've seen plenty of people that have had opportunities, myself included. I've had businesses that just didn't work, and I've had to let them go. I've had to shut them down. Sometimes that could be I've given a business away just because it was a distraction. And I think sometimes as business owners, we have to think about the fact that our idea, whilst we might love it, maybe other people don't. And I quite often look at business, people come to me and they say, Ben, I've got this great new idea. Nobody else is doing it. Well, to me, that's alarm bells. I go, well, hang on a minute. If no one else is doing it, how are you going to sell this thing? Because the easiest thing, I mean, look at Uber, for example, right? They just went to a market that already existed, that were frustrated with their current options and gave them a new option. That's the best way to build a business, is to disrupt a market. And any industry can do that. You don't have to disrupt on that scale, but certainly if you can do something better than your competitors, you're going to win the business.
Absolutely. But, and I guess then if you're in the business, if the hours are getting on top of you, if you feel like you're getting nowhere and you just can't see, where to go, what was your general recommendation, or what would have been your recommendation to yourself in the past to work out whether or not this business was viable?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of different reasons why a business is not viable, so it's difficult to answer the question as if it was one example. But I think there's several things you can look at. First of all, are you charging enough? Because if your issue is cash flow, and quite often this is the issue, right? So business owners will be working crazy hours because they can't afford to leverage themselves by hiring other people or investing in systems, and so it'll be a cash flow issue. And quite often it's just because you're not charging enough. And so, you've got to make sure your business model is right. And that means that you've got to be charging enough to make sure you can cover all your fixed expenses, your variable expenses, and have a little bit left over for a rainy day. That's just the reality of it. I think another thing is you've got to make sure market demand is there. So if you're selling something that people don't want to buy, well, then that's really tough, isn't it? So, it's going to be a big drain on you to try and market and sell this thing if people aren't really wanting it. So if it doesn't really solve a problem that people need solved, well, then you're in trouble, So I think you've got to think about that as well. The third thing is if you're not really passionate about it, you're not driving it, or it's because you don't have the skills required to do it, to build a business and grow a business, and that's something else you have to think about as well. And that's why I always say to people, if you're going to go into a business, do an apprenticeship first. I was very lucky in a sense that I came through my business career the way I did, because I got to do an apprenticeship with other people who had business experience. And I think by working, I did end up finding a job where I worked for several years as a manager inside a transport company. I then partnered with my father-in-law. He'd had his own business for many years beforehand. My dad had always had businesses. And then when I did finally start my own business as a business coach, of course, I was working with many businesses. So it was a huge apprenticeship when you think about how many years experience I had of trying different things in different industries with different people. So I think there's many reasons why businesses don't work. I think the thing is just, if something's not working, is really be objective about it, take a step back and try and work out, is this viable? Put a model together, go and speak to other people, get outsiders' opinion, there's plenty of people out there that'd be willing to sit with you for half an hour over a cup of coffee and just bounce some ideas off them and say, what do you think? Do you think this is going to work?
Yeah. And I think also at this point, I should say business owners need to be very careful if they're at this point where they have cash flow issues and they're barely able to pay themselves. Because if you're barely able to pay yourself, then it means that you're in a crunch position where if something was to happen to your business in a negative way, often you've not got the buffer to deal with it. So you just need to make sure you're protected personally, your assets are protected, and you're in a space where once again, you've got this business that's separated to you. And if the worst happens and you have to close it down, that it doesn't close down your own personal assets as well. It doesn't take you out in terms of your asset holding. Now, let's take a short break. When we get back, we'll launch into a discussion about the most common challenges that business owners grapple with when they're scaling up their business. We'll also drill into the real risks of personal liability that directors may fall into during times of tight cash flow. Then also talks about his concept of transitioning from working in the business to working on the business. And finally, we'll close this episode with some great and easy action steps that business owners can adopt in order to take their business to the next level. And that's next. I'm Joanna Oakey, and you are listening to Talking Law, a podcast proudly brought to you by Aspect Legal. If you're a professional involved in business, sales and acquisitions activity, for example, if you're a broker or an accountant or a business consultant, or if you're a business owner looking to expand by acquisition, or you're building to sell your business in the future, check out Talking Law's sister podcast, The Deal Room. Together with Talking Law, these are now two of the top legal podcasts in Australia. The Deal Room podcast contains information, interviews and tips and tricks relating to the world of business sales and acquisitions. We love this area of law and thought it was high time we took some of our specialist knowledge and shared it in a commercial context, rather than just talking about legal stuff on its own. We release new episodes every Tuesday. You can listen to our episodes on www.thedealroompodcast.com, or you can subscribe to the Deal Room podcast on iTunes to be the first to know when a new episode is out. Just type in the search panel in iTunes, The Deal Room Podcast. Welcome back. Earlier, Ben discussed his background in business and lessons from his experience for business owners. He also talked about his experience of being self-employed versus being a business owner, which is an important distinction. We also had some rich discussion on some of the telltale signs and red flags for when business owners ought to consider leaving the business they're in, and the reasons why a business perhaps may not be viable. So now let's jump back into our conversation with Ben and talk about cash flow challenges that business owners commonly face when they're scaling up the business. And then we'll dig into the real risks of directors being personally liable during times of tight cash flow. Okay, all right. Well, we've talked about that side of business. Maybe let's launch forward a bit more to growth businesses. So I presume you've probably dealt with a number of businesses before that are in growth phase, that are going well, going all great guns and have decided to scale. I guess looking at those sorts of businesses, I'd like to talk about two aspects here. Firstly, what issues you've seen businesses face in that sort of phase that can derail them. And then maybe after that, maybe if we can just have a quick chat about what businesses should most be focusing on in that phase. But let's start off with businesses heading into a growth phase. What have you seen that can be the biggest derailers of businesses in this phase?
Yeah, I think once again, cash flow can be, I mean, growing a business is expensive. Like, it takes a lot of resources.
Yeah.
And, you're hiring people, you're investing in marketing, you may be moving to bigger premises, getting more machinery, hiring more contractors, who knows, right? It takes a lot of resources to build a business and to scale a business. And I think what you touched on before about making sure you're protected is really important. I've seen many people go on that process of scaling and unfortunately run out of money. And when you run out of money, you stop paying your bills.
Yeah.
When you stop paying your bills, people start getting cranky and taking action.
Yeah.
And I think business owners really need to understand their responsibility as a director, because their laws changed back in 2012 and made you much more liable for some of the expenses you can rack up with the ATO and with superannuation that a lot of business owners aren't aware of.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you touch on that in your podcast, but certainly I've seen many people come unstuck with that, where they personally end up being so affected by closing down a business and then, of course, having a personal liability follow them around for a while whilst they try and sort that out. And it can cost them their house.
That's it. And look, we do talk a bit about this, and but I think it's one thing, us talking about it from a legal perspective. I think it's great, people also hearing it from perspective of someone who's worked with a lot of businesses in the positive and, and in these more difficult phases. Do any examples pop to mind? I think examples are great for people to, really understand some of the risks that are faced. But can you think of any clients that you've worked with and sort of, some of the real issues that have occurred when they've not really understood the issues that can occur as a director of a company?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember meeting with a woman about 3 months ago. In fact, she came chatting to me about the fact she was relaunching her business. And I will keep all the industry and the names very oblique, so we don't cross any lines there with privacy. But she had run into trouble. They'd grown the business massively and run out of money on the way. And like many business owners, they find the tax department a really easy place to get a loan from, because there's no loan application. You just don't pay your bills.
Yes. And
it gets out of hand. And as a director, they've got this responsibility. What was introduced in 2012 to stop these Phoenix companies happening is that you, if you don't report your PAYG and your superannuation, I think it is.
Yeah. For
then
3 months, essentially. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. And you become personally liable. So this particular woman, she built a business up, she scaled it up, and things didn't go to plan. They ran out of money and they couldn't pay their bills. And one day, without any notice, she happened to have a personal little nest egg, because the business was really profitable, that she'd put aside, but wasn't willing to reinvest back in the business. There was a bit of a partnership also issue there as well, where a couple of partners didn't agree on investing back into the business. And of course, in that case, when they don't have a clear agreement, one partner is not going to whack a whole bunch of money in and the other person doesn't. So the business became, stripped of capital, didn't have the money to grow. It went bust, and one day her savings just disappeared out of her bank account, and she said it was a garnishee from the ATO.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh.
And it really derailed her, as you can imagine. It was a couple of $100,000. We're not talking about chump change.
Yeah. So what would have happened in the process is, so that kind of happened on its own without her being notified. But often what happens is that directors won't update the ASIC records with their, with their addresses. And so ASIC and, the ATO will try and contact them, and on the basis of the old records that they have registered on the ASIC register, and so they miss all of these notifications, and the first thing they know is, as you say, a garnishee order that's been whacked on them. I think the issues for directors is there's no point. I mean, you might be able to negotiate a payment plan. Of course, once they've got the money, it's going to be, you're not going to be able to pull it back out again. But before you get to that point, you might be able to organise a payment plan. But once you've triggered personal liability, that's it. You've triggered it. There's no, okay, let's now look at liquidating the company and try and save ourselves from the personal liability element in that way. So really good point for you to bring up. And as I say, it's great for our audience to hear someone other than us as the lawyers talking about it, because they realise that it's real, and out there.
It does happen, I mean, I've got a lot of different stories, but that's probably the one that comes to mind, because I remember what a huge effect it had on her mentally, and the phone call that I received. And quite often, as in our industry, we build relationships with people, and they're these trusted relationships where they do tell us these things that are going on. And there are times when if you don't know your obligations, the ATO can be really, really aggressive in collecting their money.
Yeah.
And they will send out nasty letters. They'll give you 21 days to pay, or they're winding you up. So And if you structure yourself properly, which I know you would be all on top of, But, if companies structure themselves properly where they have different companies set up for their assets, for their trading accounts, et cetera, it is very simple to negotiate way through. And funnily enough, when we talk about the issues of growth, I see a lot of people who hold on too long, but the tax department and the government actually promotes you doing the right thing. So if you are insolvent, if you're not trading solvently, they actually encourage you to liquidate. That's what the process is there for. They want you to be doing the right thing. And it's difficult. It's, of course, the ego takes a hit, and you're going to have to sort out some people are going to ask a lot of questions, maybe employees need new contracts, who knows? But it's there to protect yourself, primarily. So use it to your advantage is what I say.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and I think these changes that created this automatic liability for directors, if they're more than 3 months late in reporting and them paying their BASs, they're in place because they don't want business owners to do what had been happening, which was just stop reporting. Business owners tend to, when they've got a tight cash flow, they can't pay their bills. As you say, they use the ATO as their line of credit, but they do that, or traditionally they did it by just not reporting anymore to the ATO, by just not doing their BASs. So that's why these changes came into place, and it's quite simple to comply and to protect yourself. You need to keep filing even if you're having difficulty with cash flow, and you need to seek help quickly. I think that's the point. Quick assistance. Okay, all right. So what else in growth phase have you seen, I guess, sometimes trip up organisations?
So I've seen another big issue for business owners as they grow a business is being able to let go. And if the business is all about you as a business owner and you grow, let's say you grow rapidly and you get a whole bunch of new clients, you're going to get busy real fast doing the work. And so you've got to make this transition from working in the business to on the business. And I think that's also very, very important, which then brings to another issue, which you've got to become really good at recruiting people, leading people, managing people. And when I say managing people, obviously managing them to do their job, but sometimes you've got to manage people out as well. You've got to manage people in. You've got to manage them relationships between people. It's a whole new ball game once you start hiring people. And I think, one of my good friends, Natasha Hawker from she's a HR specialist in a company called Employee Matters. She has this saying that I love, and she says, people are your greatest asset, but they're also your greatest liability. And because if you don't get it right, that can be a real issue. And I've seen a lot of people as they grow their business, just hire people that haven't put a lot of thought into job descriptions, KPI systems, accountability, training, all these things that have to go along with that.
And so where do you suggest business owners get some of these skills that they need for leadership, I guess, and for management?
So it depends on your background. I guess it's a hard question to answer. I mean, it's definitely something that we do in our programs. We teach people to be better at recruiting, leading, managing people, and but not everybody wants to work with a coach. Some people are great with reading books. I remember when I started to build my team, and I had about 35 or 40 people in my team. I was really struggling, and I was finding that in my team I was getting these little, and I hadn't had that big a business before with employees, and I'd coach people like that, but not myself personally. And I had these little pods of people getting together, almost like mini unions, if you like, within my team, creating these little problems for me. Instead of trying to face it and be proactive, I was just sort of letting it go on, and then it festered to a point where I thought, I've got to do something about this. And a part of it was I wasn't a great leader. And the first thing is admitting that, no one's born a leader. You've got to train to be a leader, and that's really understanding how to work with people, because everyone's different, right? So I bought every leadership book I could buy in the local bookstores. I think I bought 21 or 22 books.
Wow.
On leadership, and I just consumed them, and I took all the best bits, and that's how I developed my leadership style. And my team love the way I lead now. So I think it just depends on what type of person you are as to how you're going to go about training yourself to be better at managing people and leading people. But you've got to do it. Like it's a non-negotiable if you're going to build a team.
Yeah. And maybe if you could share with us, like what's the top one or two things that you took from these books and then you implemented that you think have had the biggest, I guess, outcome?
So the key things that I find have worked really well for me is I never have anyone work for me, and I'm very clear about that. When I build a team, I don't put staff on. Because I think staff do staff all. I build a team of people that we work and we work together. And so I always say, you don't work for me, you work with me. So I have this I have this policy where you have to work autonomously and be responsible for yourself. I don't watch what time you come to work. I don't watch what time you go. I don't watch how much time you spend on Facebook. And I don't mind if you're on Facebook. I understand that during the day you might need your brain to take a rest from thinking about my business. My business can't be the highest priority in your life because then you're a mixed up person. Your family and yourself has to be highest priority. So I have this whole philosophy that I'm okay with the fact that you're not going to be at 100% go all day. It's impossible. I'm not. I just expect a good couple of hours out of your day. What I really hold high as a value is integrity. So I say if you say you're going to do something, then make sure you do it. And if you can't meet that agreement, communicate it at your earliest knowledge of knowing that you're not going to make that deadline or get that job done. And I found that works really well because people feel empowered if they know you trust them just to get the job done and that they feel safe letting you know if there's been a hurdle or a problem that has stopped them from being able to complete the task. And for me, that was it wasn't something that I had to change what I did. It was that I had a belief that leadership had to be different to that. When I allowed myself just to be that person, which is what I would prefer anyway, I found the team really loved it. Now, there are some people that take advantage of it. Well, guess what? They don't get to stick around. They have to go and work somewhere where there is more accountability and strict and where you put your mobile phone in a locker when you walk into the office. That's not the environment that I wanted. So I found that worked well for me.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right. Wonderful. So then what do you think perhaps are the easiest things that business owners can do to create a successful business or take their business to the next level?
It's funny. You've probably heard of Stephen Covey. He had that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's a lot of things that he spoke about but one of the things I took from learning from him was this thing called the time target. And he talks about the different activities in your day as an entrepreneur, how some things are urgent and important, and they're the demands of your client ringing up, or it could be having to get a sale or paying a bill to keep the lights on. He said some things are a distraction. So he's there, these are the things that are not urgent, not important. And he said there's things that are where you're in delusion. So this avoidance behavior, when you've got to do 20 cold calls, but you think going to office works and getting paper is more important.
Yes.
But then he said there's this zone this section he calls the zone of your time when you're in the zone. And the zone is where you work on things that are important but not urgent. And so I always look at a business owner and say, okay, well, how many of those things you're doing? Now, these are the things that if you don't do them, it's not going to be the end of the world, but it's going to stop your business from growing. And they're things like sitting down and doing a plan. Doing a plan is not urgent, but it's important. Doing a marketing plan, not urgent, but it's important. Working out, your default diary. So what are the tasks that you're going to do? It's not urgent, but it's important. Working out what tasks you can actually delegate that would be easy for you to delegate and free up some of your time to work on the more important things. Once again, not urgent, but important. So all of these things that you think about working, I call it working on the business. And I see so many business owners working in the business so much that by the time they're done in their day, they're too tired to work on the business. Well, you've got to make time to work on the business. So the easiest way to grow a business is to plan it, is to sit down and work out, okay, well, how am I going to grow this business? Actually think about how many customers do I need? Where am I going to get these customers from? How much am I prepared to pay per customer? So that's my acquisition cost. What is my sales process? Then if I generate a lead, have I got a documented sales process that ensures I maximize my conversion rate, which of course reduces my acquisition cost because I'm converting more of my leads into customers. Am I dealing with the right customers? Like, am I taking on any work because I'm desperate and I'm doing stuff that I'm not making money from? Or am I really honed in on the right type of people to work with? So I'm working with customers that not only do I enjoy working with, but, are profitable and give me lots of referrals and they pay their bills quickly. There's all of these things. And it's if you can take a step out of your business just for a day or two every quarter and work on thinking about, okay, what are the things I can find? Because there's lots of little things. It's not one big thing to be successful in business. It's lots of little things that make a great business. But you've got to take the time out to work on them.
Yeah. Look, I think that's such a good point that you're making. And I think it also depends on why someone has gone into business in the first place. Some people really don't enjoy that process and some people do. But I guess it's about recognizing what you are and what you enjoy doing, because, it's very hard to grow a business if you're not devoting time to answering those questions. So if you're not if you don't enjoy doing it, then perhaps that's when you absolutely need to bring someone else in to work with you personally through it to ensure that you actually, are answering some of these questions.
I think, and the other thing that comes into play, Joanna, is psychology. I think you are trained as a human being from the minute that you start going to school that you have a start and a stop time. And, I think that you speak to most business owners, if they were to take every Friday off and sit on the beach just thinking about how to grow their business, they actually feel guilty about doing that.
Yeah.
And it's a psychology, right?
Yeah.
Because when you have a job, if you don't turn up at 8:30 when you're told to, and I know some employers, if you took a lunch break and you took 3 minutes longer than you were supposed to, you'd be questioned about it. I've seen employers question employees that go to the toilet too often. Well, you can't help it if you've got a weak bladder. But this stuff exists out there. It's crazy.
Wow.
It exists. So psychologically, as human beings, if we're not working when we're supposed to be working, I'm doing air quotes right there because that's something that's been embedded into our head. People feel guilty, and I was the same. I'm no different. I had to work my way through that myself. So and I work with a lot of clients over the years on helping them understand that it's okay just to take a day out or half a day out and just turn your phone off, turn your laptop off. Even if you're just sitting on the beach or in your favourite park or playing a game of golf, whatever it is you love to do, you could be crocheting something, you could be painting a picture, you could be out doing photography. Your brain's always going to think about your business, and you shouldn't feel guilty about taking that quiet time to think about how can I make my business better, because that's the most important time. I think who was it that said? I think it might have been. I go to a lot of training and talks and things, and I remember I think it was John McGrath. He said I think it was him. He said it's what you say to yourself about yourself when you're by yourself that matters the most. And I just love that saying.
It is a great saying. I think you're absolutely right. It's so hard for business owners who, the most part, are actually quite high achievers as well, and focused on this concept that the more hours they put in, the more they'll get out. But it's not really about that at the end of the day. And, I've discovered something about myself personally. The time when I am most creative and come up with the best ideas for the business is actually when I'm at the gym listening to a podcast on double speed. It does something to my head. And that's when, I come up with all of my best ideas. But it's interesting because, we've got a legal practice. Lawyers are renowned for spending many hours sitting and, just plugging away at a computer. But it was a fascinating discovery for me personally to realise that I am my most creative when I'm out of the office environment. And I think that's probably true of many, many business owners as well.
Yeah, and I can relate to that because not when I'm exercising, I don't go to the gym anywhere near where I should, if anyone's seen my figure. But more so when I go to these workshops, and it's funny, I can go to a whole one-day workshop and I get to the end of the day and go, well, I hardly listen to that speaker, especially if they're not really engaging. But the time that I'm not listening to them is probably because they said something amazing and it's triggered my brain into thinking, and then a great idea comes out of it. So I go into those days thinking if I come out with just one great idea, I'm happy. Yeah,
I agree. So maybe part of the message that we're portraying here at the moment today as well is to be a bit softer on yourself as a business owner and allow yourself that time away from the business without feeling you have to cane yourself to get outcomes. I think that's a really important message. Okay, good. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for all of your input, Ben. I guess, do you have any sort of last nuggets that you would like to leave our listening audience about, suggestions that you have for them with their business? You've talked about getting out of the business and focusing on the important, not urgent. Anything else there that, you feel we should leave our listeners with to keep in mind?
Yeah, look, I think, and it's what I tell a lot of business owners, is don't settle. Don't think that what you've got right now is what you have to have. And I see too many business owners working really hard and thinking there's no other way out. And that's what I was trapped in all those years ago with my transport company, where I was definitely suffering from depression. There are plenty of people out there that are willing to talk to you and help you. And I think you don't need to be embarrassed. If you're not where you want to be, go and get some help. No one starts their business to fail. That's the reality, right? I've spoken to a lot of business owners and I've never, ever had someone say to me, Ben, I started so I could fail. Yet over 90% of businesses fail. And the reason for that is because they don't look for help. Look at you, for example, Joanna, as a lawyer. You can't be a lawyer without going and training. For how many years did you have to train?
Yeah, gosh, I don't know. Like 6 years at uni, another year getting, post-grad diplomas, and then we've got practical time, and then, you don't know anything until you've been in a legal firm for 5 or 10 years. So there you go. There's, a couple of decades gone on it.
Of learning to be a great lawyer.
That's it.
Now, how much time do you reckon most business owners put into learning to be a great business owner?
Yeah, good point, Ben. That's a really good point. That's so true. Absolutely. Yeah, good point.
So it's just you don't know what you don't know. So my little wisdom, a parting wisdom would be get out there and just, if you want to do better, you got to go and learn how to do better. You will never be born with the skills. There's no such thing as a born entrepreneur or a born leader. You are going to have to learn the skills, and the skills are easier to learn. And I guess this day and age, it's much easier than it ever was. It's the best time to be in business. It's an amazing time to be in business because there is so much available to us at our fingertips. It's just amazing these days. So I always say to people, get out there and learn as much as you can about growing your business, and you will get a better business. But if you don't make an effort to do it, no one's going to do it for you. It doesn't matter how much they care about you. No one else is going to make you successful.
That's fabulous. All right, Ben, thank you so much for coming on to Talking Law today. How do our listeners find you if they want to find out more?
I think the best way is if they head across to maxmyprofit.com.au. That's our website. We're all about helping you build the business you imagine. So if you imagine having a business that was giving you a better lifestyle, better income, working less hours, and maybe was a bit more fun, then maybe we can help you. Like I said, we can't help everybody. We're pretty picky about who we work with because we're looking for really motivated business owners that want to make that change. But if you think that's you, then head to maxmyprofit.com.au. Heaps of free resources there as well, lots of templates and downloads, our blog. But also, if you want to have a quick chat with one of my team, that's probably the best place to go.
Great. And you also have a podcast, so where you talk about all things business. So where should our listeners go if they want to pop along from this podcast straight over in iTunes or Stitcher or Android over to your podcast?
Yeah, just go to any of your favorite podcast player and just look for Business Brain Food, or you can go to businessbrainfood.com.au. We have an amazing thing there called the Smart Podcast Player that makes it really easy for you to listen. But of course, most of you like listening to it on your phone, so iTunes is probably the place to go. But Business Brain Food.
Great, excellent, wonderful. Thank you, Ben. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Joanna. I appreciate it.
Great. And that wraps up our conversation with Ben Fewtrell of Max My Profit. If you liked what you heard today, pop over to our podcast on iTunes or Stitcher for Android and hit subscribe to be the first to know when we have a new episode out. And of course, if you know anybody who might want to hear, or in fact needs to hear, the insights and warnings that Ben and I talked about in this episode, go ahead and share this episode with them. On our show notes, we also provide an option for you to download a copy of the full transcript to this episode if you'd like to read it in more detail, or if you would like to book in a free appointment with one of our lawyers at Aspect Legal to discuss how we might be able to assist you and your business. Just head over to our website at talkinglaw.com.au. Look for this episode and there you'll find a download link. So look, thanks again for listening in. This has been Joanna Oakey and Talking Law, a podcast brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Talking Law. Tune in next time for more smart legal tips and tricks to keep you clear of those legal landmines. If you want to get a download of today's show notes, head over to talkinglaw.com.au.
Are you looking for a top quality legal team to assist you in your organisation? Aspect Legal is an innovative commercial legal practice that specialises in providing fast and professional services for their clients. If you'd like to chat about how we might be able to assist you, simply head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au to book in a time for a free discussion with one of our lawyers.